Hello friends and viewers. In this video, I want to educate you on how you can optimize the Fancy Hat trinket in Sword of Convallaria. Starting with the basics, Fancy Hat is a legendary trinket that provides immunity to disrupt and increases magic defense by 3 to 5% depending on star level when healthy. So, note that when units are below 70% HP, Fancy Hat loses some value without the magic defense increase. There are characters who have unique relationships, both positive and negative, with this trinket. The objective of this analysis is to help quantify which characters you may favor equipping with a Fancy Hat and which characters you may not consider at all. I defined Fancy Hat's usage with the following rating scale. An excellent rating is for characters with innate debuffs from skills that can be prevented with an immunity to disrupt. These are characters who benefit greatly from Fancy Hat and may be considered their best in the slot. A very good rating is for characters with magic defense scaling, increasing damage or healing. These are characters who you may deeply prefer equipping with Fancy Hat. A moderately good rating is for characters who have some benefit with magic defense scaling compared to the average character. This also includes a pool of characters who can externally provide immunity to or remove disrupt debuffs. A good rating is for characters who have neither innate immunities to disrupt debuffs or magic defense scaling, but can dispel debuffs in general. A moderately fair rating is for characters who have neither innate immunities to disrupt debuffs or magic defense scaling, and also cannot dispel debuffs. A fair rating is for characters who can already immune disrupt debuffs themselves. These are for characters you may not prefer to equip with Fancy Hat due to their ability to manage disrupt debuffs in their skill kit. For excellent users of Fancy Hat, we have Akambe and Leonide. When Akambe uses Burning Riches, Fancy Hat prevents the energy restored debuff. This is very helpful to maintain Akambe's damage and support output as a high energy use character. When Leonide uses Charge Stance, Fancy Hat removes a straight line movement restriction. This essentially means Fancy Hat and Charge Stance give Leonide +2 movement. For very good users of Fancy Hat, we have Suppression and Flare. Fancy Hat is very good for Suppression because the damage of his trait scales with magic defense. By extension, it increases the potency of Devout Guard as well. Fancy Hat is very good for Flare because it increases the healing of her Battlefield Healing reaction skill. However, note that Battlefield Healing can trigger as many times per round, but if Flare drops below the healthy state, she loses the magic defense bonus from Fancy Hat. For moderately good use of Fancy Hat, we have Guzman. Fancy Hat is moderately good for Guzman because of the mana conversion buff from his Darkest Blade skill, scaling his physical attack with his magic defense. The reason this does not find its way to being very good for Guzman is because of his trait. Guzman does more damage the less HP he has. The Fancy Hat magic defense bonus only triggers when healthy. Other moderately good users of the Fancy Hat include Slash, K.A. Archer, and Edda. Lash and K.A. Archer have skills that externally provide immunity to disrupt debuffs, the magic defense boost, and critical enhancement respectively. Edda possesses the ability to dispel disrupt debuffs with Guiding Gleam. Fancy Hat is moderately good for these units because they still need to immune disrupt debuffs themselves to remedy disrupt debuffs on others. If a unit already has a disrupt debuff and they receive an immunity after, the debuff remains on the unit, but the effects are nullified. Reversing the steps, if a unit has an immunity to disrupt buff and is then attacked with a disrupt debuff, the disrupt debuff will not apply at all. For a good rating, this is any character that can dispel debuffs. If a support unit has their active skills blocked, they can only basic attack and cannot use their support skills. As such, retaining their ability to use their support skills allows them to dispel debuffs on other units, or at the very least, heal and keep the rest of the party alive. For a moderately fair rating is any damage dealer who cannot dispel debuffs. Having skills blocked means they are mitigated from their intended performance. However, they can still basic attack at minimum, so there are other characters who can better utilize Fancy Hat. For a fair rating, we have Coco, Mytha, and Palpable Guard who can learn the Invulnerable skill, which grants them immunity to disrupt already. K.A. Guard can learn the Forced March skill, which grants him Control Immunity. Control Immunity comprises immunity to bound and disrupt effects. Fancy Hat is a fair trinket for these characters because of their ability to already immune disrupt debuffs, though not 100% uptime. If these units are not using these skills, then the usability of Fancy Hat slightly moves up the rating scale. So to summarize with some closing thoughts, Akambe, Leonide, Suppression, and Flare are great units to equip with a fancy hat. For all other units, prioritize your fancy hats on support units that can directly immune or remove disrupt debuffs, or remove debuffs in general. Avoid using fancy hat on units with innate immunity to disrupt to avoid redundancy. Fancy hat grants immunity to disrupt baseline, and additional star levels only increase the magic defense bonus. I recommend to always having at least 2 fancy hats available to use. However, remember that fancy hat is only strong when there are disrupt debuffs to immune or magic damage to mitigate. If neither of these are present, consider other trinket options. I hope this video has given you some food for thought about your fancy hat trinkets. If there is anything I missed, please feel welcome to comment below. Thank you so much for watching.